welcome. Good afternoon, participants. Good afternoon, participants. I think we should wait for numbers to come in. I'm seeing 13 participants. Let's keep on and see if others can join in, then we start. Good afternoon, participants. Can somebody unmute and confirm if I can be heard?
Definitely, gracious.
Mr. Bire, are you on? Mr. Bire, good afternoon. Are you on? Hello?
Very gracious.
Yes,
Mr. Wira, as if has not logged in.
I've called him and he's coming in again.
Yeah, because
So
what I
let's wait
can
for
see
him
is
and then
okay.
let's wait for him and then we start.
Hi. Like in 5-10 minutes would be able to, even if they are like 20-25 stand, okay.
All right.
Yes, sir.
afternoon, participants. I wish to welcome you to this webinar, this engagement with students. And this afternoon, we are going to discuss paper 13, advanced financial reporting, to get insights into what it is about, how should we handle it in order to pass it and excel in our exam. I wish to welcome all the participants that have joined so far. As we wait for others to also come in as we go along, I wish to inform you that as we go along, you may make use of the Q&A and type in your question or any comment, and can also make a good use of the chat so that we can have an interactive engagement. Mr. Will, are you on now? Hello? Mr. Will, are you on? I'm waiting for our presenter to come in and we start, but yeah, it seems she's having challenges joining in. Mr. Will, can you hear me now?
Mr. Mushi,
Yes.
has been logged on as the panelist, or is using the link for the other attendees?
Yes.
Let me use for the panelists.
Okay.
Good afternoon. You can hear me now. Here we are here. Good afternoon, everyone. Can anyone hear me?
Good afternoon, Mr. Willie.
Okay, so you can hear me well?
I'm hearing you, Mr. Willie.
Okay, thank you so much. Apologies because I was hearing you, but you weren't hearing me. So I'm ready to begin.
You are clear all.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, Mr. Willie, it's coming.
You can see my screen now?
Yes, Mr. Willie, I can see the screen.
Okay.
The gentleman
thank you.
trying to look at the book in front, yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me for this presentation for the student engagement seminar. My name is ICPAU Bernard. I'm a certified public accountant and also a member of CPA. I'm been a finance manager over a period of the last 10 years in different organizations. I've worked with Kakira Sugar. I've worked with Spear Motors, International Medical Group as a finance manager. And then the last 3 years I've been with Impact Health Organization, which implements for the United Nations in Sudan. And then currently I'm a head of finance with the Comprehensive Rehabilitation Center for people with disability, working with the CBM Germany project. So I'm here to discuss advanced financial reporting, paper 13. I'll be looking through some of the challenges students are likely to face in this paper. I will also be looking at the comments that have been made by the examiners for the last 3 sittings. And then I will also try to focus specifically on the last sitting, and then give a few tips here and there of what is the expectation for students for paper 13 according to the examiners. So I've just picked these components about the concerns that have been raised by the examiners to the students, and we can always try to discuss them and see what's the best way forward that can enable students to be able to pass. So that is about me. So I will move directly to my presentation. So basically, paper 13 is one of the advanced level papers of CPA. And it's a paper that, based on the comments that the examiners have come identifying over a period of time, it seems this paper has caused a little bit of challenges to the candidates. So I'll go directly into the general observations. So the general observations, I will pick the observations that have been noted by examiners in March 2022, June 2022, September 2022, and last year, December 2021. Some of these comments are basically general observations that have been made by the examiners, and then I will go ahead and focus on the specifics. So the first comment that the examiners make, actually all the 3 sittings, it's basically about syllabus coverage. And the examiners have expressed concern that it looks like candidates, before they appear to sit for these exams, they don't seem to have covered the whole syllabus. And you realize this is a consistent comment which has appeared in all the previous 4 sittings. I'm sure all candidates prior to preparing for this particular paper, it's always good that a student is conversant with the syllabus, the whole syllabus from start to finish. And at least in my opinion, it will be good to cover at least 100%. And if not, at least 95 to 98% of the syllabus, so that when a student or candidate goes to the exam, he's well prepared. Another point that has been coming up from the examiner is basically integration of knowledge. Integration of knowledge, when I read through these are comments, basically it was candidates failing to build up on the prior period knowledge from papers that interlink to these paper 13. Take an example of financial accounting, paper 1, then financial reporting, paper 8, and then advanced financial reporting. So you realize that paper 13 integrates the component of all these papers. So simply meaning that once any knowledge that has been obtained from paper 1 and paper 8 is also applicable at paper 13. So when I look at these comments, you realize that also these comments have been made in March, they have been made in June, they have been made in September 2022, and also last year, December 2022. So it's a consistent thing. So it's something the examiners have observed that maybe once a student passes paper 1 or passes paper 8, they disregard it when they are doing paper 13. But now, based on this comment, it's a clear indication that actually the knowledge that has been obtained in these lower papers is very critical for paper 13 advanced financial reporting. And then another comment, which has also been very consistent, is question interpretation. How do students interpret this question? It seems from these comments that simply meaning that there's been a wrong interpretation of most of the questions that the examiners have set. And I think candidates needs to pay clear attention or close attention or attention to details when it comes to interpretation of these particular questions. Another comment which is also consistent is basically presentation skills. Papers at level 13, which is at one of the highest levels of CPA, presentation and communication skill is one of the key factors that is expected out of the student to be able to pass or excel in this paper. What do we mean by, or what does maybe the examiner mean by saying presentation skills or communication skills? At this paper, when I look at the structure of paper 13, you realize that it involves a lot of report writing, discussions, advising management on finance-related transactions, financial reporting, and components like that. So at this level, the way a candidate presents his or her answers is very critical and will be able to enable these students at least contribution to two marks for him or her to be able to pass. So that is my interpretation from the comments from the examiners. And we realize that actually also this comment, with the exception of September, this comment had been made in December last year, 2021. It was made in March 2022, and it was also made in June 2022. And then another comment also, which has appeared in all the sittings, has limited knowledge of financial reporting standards. Paper 13 candidates, those who are doing this paper and those who cover syllabus in depth, you realize that one of the biggest components of paper 13 is the International Financial Reporting Standards, the IFRSs and the ISCs. So it seems from this observation that there's a little bit of shallow knowledge of how candidates understand these international financial reporting standards before they appear or they go to sit for these particular exams. And then another observation, we have appreciation of current reporting developments. This comment appeared in December 2021. So we observed that the international financial reporting standards, they keep changing, or they keep on being revised from year to year, additions. And I think they form part of this, this paper. When candidates, I'm sure when you look at the syllabus, there's a component of recent or current developments in financial reporting. There's also ability to interpret scenario-based question, practicability of the IFRSs. So these comments, I picked them exactly the way they were in the previous sitting comments that the examiners actually raised. So what do we observe from this? We actually observe that for the last 4 sittings, all candidates, or whatever the examiners observed, it seems that they observed the same trend, sitting after sitting, sitting after sitting. So that in my opinion, I don't know whether the candidates take a little bit of time to peruse through some of these comments. So I think having looked at those particular comments, it will be very important for candidates who are preparing to sit for this particular paper, maybe in December, not so sure when, or in future. Should take a little bit of time to look at these examiners' comments. I think these comments help because it's actually the observation that the examiners or the markers observe while marking these papers. Because I don't think they will write these comments if they don't observe exactly what they see. So I also try to look at the pass rate. So I try to bring it in a line graph so that it just explains exactly clearly how the pass rate of this paper has been. It's also encouraging. So when you look at October 2021, the pass rate was approximately around in the range of around 10%. In December 2021, it rose, it shot up slightly to almost around 19.9 there. And then in March 2022, came back to around slightly above 10.1%, June around 10.6, and now you realize in September 2022, you realize it's around approximately maybe 9.7, 9.6 based on this graph. So what do we observe? We observe that actually the performance of this paper has not been so good. It has been declining, it has been declining. And when you compare this declining performance rate to the comments made the examiner, then you see that they're actually interrelated. So it simply means that candidates possibly have continuously failed to address some of the comments made by the examiners, and we realize that it's actually affecting the performance. So I think in future, in preparation, candidates should take this actually seriously. Look at what the comments the examiners put in place, and it should be able to help these students or candidates to be able to prepare for their exam in future. So the candidates who are here, I will actually advise that it will be every time they release these exams. I'm sure they also, I'm sure CPA doesn't take a lot of time before they release the comments. They should take a little bit of time and try to look at these comments, analyze these particular comments, and also the pass rate. I think that's going to try to help them when they're trying to prepare for the examinations. Now, I try to look at the analysis. I'm going to present to you the analysis of the composition of these papers for the last 4 sittings. And I would like us to pay a little bit of closer attention to how the examination trend has been. And not for purposes of spotting, just to understand what could be the cause of students passing. Is it that there are very big variances from paper to paper, or that the actual standard within the syllabus enshrined within the syllabus that ICPA provides? So when I look at December 2021, we can see that question 1 was basically business combination, all standard, IFRS 3, IFRS 10, and then a component of operating segment, that's IFRS 8. Question 2, you see it was actually IS 41, agriculture, IS 8, accounting policies, IFRS 2, share-based payments. And then question 3, it had components of IS 12, IS 36, question 4, IS 33, and question 5, IFRS 6. Now, when I moved to March 2022, I observed that actually question 1 was still business combination, looking at still IFRS 3 and IFRS 10. When I look at the pass rate, it's simply meaning that maybe candidates didn't pay attention at the core of this paper, that the basics and the principles of business combination are the same, regardless of how the question is set. So it's simply meaning that maybe in the process of trying to prepare for these particular exams, the candidate didn't pay attention to the core principles of business combination. Maybe that's why these candidates failed to be able to do business combination, and the pass rate actually declined. When you look at question 2 of March 2022, it had IS 33. Question 4 of December 2021 also had IS 33. It's basically a principle of earnings per share. So you also still realize that if the student had the knowledge of IFRS 33, IS 33 earnings per share, they could be able to answer a question under IS 33 under any angle, not necessarily cramming the question that came maybe in December 2021 and trying to use that particular question to revise for March 2022. So you realize that actually the trend is into the standard, but not the question itself. When I look at, let's look at June 2022 and September 2022 also in question 1. Question 1 of June 2022 was cash flows, and then a component of also IFRS 10, which also appeared in March 2022 and also appeared in December 2021. Question 1 of September 2022, it was also cash flows and component of ratio analysis of cash flows. So what do you observe? You observe that to me, I will look like these papers look standardized, and maybe could be examining core principles of these particular standards. But I think candidates, best that maybe they don't take into consideration the comments made by the examiners, maybe take it for granted, maybe. That's why they are failing to pick out these particular components. I will actually sometimes challenge candidates that if you did for yourself this particular analysis for maybe the last 4 or 5 sittings, not for purposes of sporting, but for purposes of understanding the principles and the trends of how these standards are being examined, and not necessarily picking out specific questions, but understanding the core principles, the recognition criteria, the measurement criteria, the disclosure requirements of these particular standards, and without necessarily having to cram a standard as a whole, so that when you go to the exam, you just pour the component of recognition criteria, subsequent measurement, trying to apply the situation question into the standard. We go ahead and look at, I can still look at September 2022 question 3. It had IS 8, accounting changes, accounting policies, changes in accounting estimates and errors. Question 2 of December 2021 had the same question, in that same standard. Question 4 of March 2022 had income taxes and interim financial reporting. When you go to question 3, December 2021, you also realize it had components of income taxes. So you realize that actually these are components of paper 13. This standard and the exam is standardized. So on the other side, maybe there's a little bit of maybe inadequate or poor preparation for the exam. And I think the candidates should actually take a note and try to do an analysis for themselves in this way. When you do an analysis for yourself in this way, you don't encourage yourself to cram, but you try to pick out the principle and application of those particular standards, and more especially those standards that maybe are examined year in, year out, year in, year out, because sometimes they form the core of that particular paper, and more especially paper 13. So I hope maybe when you're preparing for yourself for exam, you sit down and do this particular nature of analysis. And once you've done this particular nature of analysis, then try to pick standardized questions and attempt them based on the available time, say 45 minutes, maybe 3 hours for the whole paper, and see if you're actually able to answer these questions and finish them within the 3 hours, or if you have 3 hours of a time in a day, and do and see. And then maybe get one of your tutors and see if you can be able to assess for you, the performance on this particular thing. Or you can even assess yourself based on the provided solution, and then look, do you really understand the core principle of this particular standard? So from this analysis, you can all see and you realize, and actually, before I move to the next slide, let's look at question 5. In question 5, in all these sittings, I observe components of integrated reporting and IFRS for SMEs. You see in March 2022, the area of examination was actually IFRS for SMEs and ethical conduct of accountant. The same question 5 in September 2022, it still had IFRS for SME and integrated financial reporting. So it's simply meaning that if a student had were keen in their preparation for examination, I think such kind of question will be actually easier for them to attempt, as compared to maybe any other question. So, and also, when I look at this analysis, I think also maybe choice of questions when candidates are in the exam is actually key. So I think my advice will be that as you're preparing for exams, do this kind of analysis, and then try also to have better choices for questions of where you understand the key components of this particular question. Now, I'm going to concentrate on the findings or the examiner's comments on September 2022 for the observations. I will try to pick out the examiner's outlines, question by question. Try to find out, and then we talk about it, and then we find what exactly did the examiners pick out of the candidates who attempted this particular question. It should be able to help you actually prepare for your next exam, whether you're sitting in December or you're going to sit this paper in future. So let's look at question 1. From my previous presentation, question 1 for this particular paper was actually IS7, statement of cash flows, and component of analysis of the cash flow ratio analysis. So what did the examiner observe? Observation number 1 was that candidates were conversant with the format of presentation of indirect cash flows. So it simply means here, it seems candidates who sat this paper knew how to do presentation of a cash flow using the indirect method. I think that's something the examiner observed. Then what happened? Why is it that these candidates, if they knew the format, they knew how to present cash flows using the indirect method, why is it that they didn't pass? Let's look at comment 2. Comment 2, that the candidates were unable to classify cash flows between operating activities, investing activities, and financing activities. So one of the key components when you're preparing cash flows under IS7, whether you're using direct method or the indirect method, it is the ability for you to be able to classify where do these cash flows fall. Like say investing activities. What are the components of investing activities? What are the components of financing activities? What are the components of operating activities? Now that takes us back to the comments that I generally made that I first presented in the first 2 slides, the first 4 slides, saying that candidates are unable to integrate knowledge from the previous papers. So you realize that when you look at paper 1, it has cash flows, I7. When you look at paper 8, it has cash flows, I7. When you look at paper 13, it has cash flows, IS7. So that's what the examiner means by saying candidates are failing to integrate knowledge from previous papers. So if a candidate knew how to classify what are operating activities, the operating activities, these are cash flows, yeah, that an entity undertakes on a day-to-day basis to generate, to undertake the operation. Investing activities, these are investment activities and acquisition of non-current assets or long-term investments, including disposals or investing in other companies, things like that. Financing activities, these are activities that an organization undertakes to be able to finance the operations of the organization. Just that basic knowledge will be able to help a candidate to be able to classify these activities well. So from the examiner's observations, candidates fail to do this classification. And if you cannot be able to classify, I don't think you can be able to take away a lot of marks out of this. And then we have point number 3, which looks at the inability by candidates to present cash flows correctly, whether they are inflows or outflows. Now, if I try to interpret this, I look at it in a way that it could be that candidates were able to calculate the exact figures for the cash flows on a certain balance sheet line or on a certain P&L line. But it seems when they were carrying those figures to present them in the face of the cash flows, maybe you could have the right figure, and instead of presenting it as an inflow, maybe presented it as an outflow. I think that limits your ability to get or accumulate more marks. So I think presentation of this figure, whether it's an inflow or an outflow, it's also very, very, very important. And to me, this one still takes me back that this is it's actually a bare minimum when you're presenting a cash flow, right from paper 1, paper 8, and paper 13, that I should be able to know what is cash outflow. Cash outflow, these are monies that leave the organization. Payment out, what are cash inflows? Cash inflow, this is money coming in. That even if a candidate failed to know what an inflow is using this term, you should ask yourself, what is an inflow? Inflow, money coming in, money being received by the organization, money coming into the bank, money coming in from debtors, yeah? Payments coming in, yeah? Outflows, money leaving the organization, regardless of where they fall, whether they fall under operating activities or under investing activities or under a financing activity. Observation 4, candidates unable to adjust adjustment of non-cash items. When you're presenting, from my observation and from my experience also, when you're presenting the P&L or the profit and loss, the profit and loss has components that are seated in your profit or in your loss that are actually non-cash, things like depreciation, things like income that are being recognized or accrued that actually did not involve money actually coming in. Now, when you're preparing cash flow using the direct method, the first step normally is on the component of profit or loss before tax, is to adjust for those components which are seated in the profit or loss and did not involve cash movements, either in or out. And some of these adjustment of non-cash items, most of the time, they actually sit on the face of the P&L. So these are direct components that maybe candidate will just pick from the P&L and put them back in the cash flow. So you realize that even candidates who start in September could not be able to do that. And now this is a component that then if you're at level 3 doing paper 13, how is it possible that you're not even able to adjust this non-cash item? You can't be able to identify depreciation. You can't be able to identify maybe incomes, maybe investment income that are not cash flows, maybe impairment losses, impairment gain, foreign exchange gain, foreign exchange losses, such kind of adjustment that do not involve cash movement in, cash movement out. So it's very important for candidates to take actually this seriously, because maybe some of them we take them for granted and actually they affect our capability to be able to present these cash flows well. Now, using the indirect method for you to be able to determine how much money comes in and how much money goes out. There's that capability of students should be able to do what called control accounts. The control accounts will be able for you to get the balancing figures that indicate the actual movement of cash in and out of the organization. These involve the receivables, this involves the payables, this involves share capital, this involves PPE. So it simply means that maybe in last sitting, candidates were not very conversant on how to create control accounts. In paper 1, there is a specific topic that deals with basically how to create control accounts. So by the time you're reaching paper 13, then a candidate should be able to know preparing control accounts should not be something that should terrorize you when you're actually in exam. Yeah, even if you don't know how to prepare a control account, you can use the old method, just using T accounts. Yeah, when you use T accounts, what's the balance brought forward, what's the balance carried down? Those are sometimes, I think, from my experience, you pick them from the balance sheets. And then what are the movements? Some of those movements you can pick them from the profit and loss. Some of them you can pick them from the additional information. Yeah, so that's simply meaning that students have to be keen what amounts go to which control accounts. So that also takes me back to the comment that was made by the examiners that candidates don't really integrate knowledge for this paper. So when you're preparing for this paper, you shouldn't forget the knowledge that has been picked up in paper 1 and paper 8. Now, when you're finalizing preparing the cash flows, there is a component of what we call a reconciliation of cash and cash equivalent, which we all know when you presented cash flows from paper 1, from paper 8, and it's not different in paper 13. When I was reading those comments, I read the comments. I hope you've taken time when you're coming for this webinar to look at some of those comments. One of the comments that the examiner made that almost all the candidates couldn't do a cash and cash reconciliation of cash and cash equivalent at the end of the cash flow, which sometimes it's to me those are free marks. That in the event that even assuming I'm doing my cash flows, maybe if I will be the one, the candidate doing this exam, and I try to make my cash flows and they fail to balance, I could prepare, at least I could prepare a separate reconciliation of cash and cash equivalent, which you just pick them from the balance sheet. Yeah, from the balance sheet is you have the opening balance of cash, you have the closing balance of cash, and you could have the difference between the opening balance of the cash and closing balance of the cash will basically give you the total cash movement within the period. And that I think, I'm sure it has a allocation of marks in these cash flows. So you realize that the components that made candidates maybe not perform very well in this paper are actually just the basic components of IS7. So it's simply meaning that when you're preparing for this paper, don't ignore those basic components. Don't ignore those basic components. Well, at some point when I was doing this paper, we used to have those candidates whom used to say, for them, they only do those difficult numbers. But you see, at the end of the day, these basic components are what form the principle of that paper. And it's not how hard the number comes at those basic principles of a question that will actually make you pass this paper. So in my observation, from comment 1 to comment 6, it's actually just basic principles of cash flows. And from the examiner's point of view, it's simply meaning the candidates who sat for this paper did not have a good idea of what cash flows are. Yet in June 2022, there was also a question for cash flows. I'm sure if you know cash flows, regardless of how they set these cash flows, you should be able to do this cash flow. So it's simply meaning that, like I said in the presentation of the general observations, that the principle, the underlying principles in some of these standards is what will actually make a candidate pass some of these papers. So when we're preparing, we should ignore those underlying principles in these particular standards. We should pay attention to them. So let's look at question 2. Let's look at the observation of question 2. Question 2. Now, Question 2 examined IFRS 5 and IFRS 2. And these are the observations. And you realize that from my analysis of the question, you realize that IFRS 5 and IFRS 2, these are also standards that have been consistently be examined by ICPAU, maybe in different formats, different questions, different interpretation, but the principle, the underlying principle is actually the same. And that's why I said in the first observation, I observed that actually from my analysis, you've seen up there that these standards have been actually frequent standards which have always been examined right from December 2021 to September. Now, what did the examiner observe? Observe that majority candidates identify reclassification criteria under IFRS 5 as asset to be held for sale, which was a good thing, that actually candidates were able to identify the standard, that this is a standard of non-current assets held for sale, and actually knew under what criteria should be met for an asset or PPE asset or a non-current asset can be reclassified from PPE or from non-current asset into a current asset and classified as non-current asset held for sale. So I think in that area, candidates must have been performed very well because the examiner took note of it. Point number 3, it says that inadequate knowledge in computing impairment loss and allocating them between goodwill and the other assets. So when you're reclassifying an asset, normally from my knowledge in accounting is that first you have to test for impairment, where this particular, before you classifying it from non-current asset to the current asset held for sale, you first check for impairment. Is this asset actually did it get impaired? Because you're likely to sell it in the nearest future within a period of at least 1 year. Is this still of the same value when you're reclassifying it, or has it lost value? Yeah, and it's from this observation, impairment loss is calculated according to the requirement of IS 36. Yeah, now this is also the integration of knowledge. Yeah, as much as you know IFRS 5, for you to calculate the impairment loss under IFRS 5, you should have some knowledge, innate knowledge under IS 36 on how impairment loss is calculated. So it's simply meaning that actually also in this area, candidates didn't perform very well. So that takes us back integration of knowledge. And then 4, inability to classify the operational asset held for sale. So if in point 1, the examiner noted that actually candidates were able to identify the criteria under which an asset can be reclassified from non-current assets to current asset and as an asset held for sale, then how is it possible that the students couldn't just remove that asset from non-current asset and put it under current asset as an asset held for sale? That tells me, or I will actually interpret it like maybe as much as the candidates had the principles, they didn't know how to apply it. Now that comes back to the point, general observation I presented in the previous slide, that applicability. So if you know the criteria, how is it possible that you can't apply it to an accounting situation or to an accounting transaction? So it's simply meaning that when you're also preparing this particular transaction, look at scenario-based questions. I've been given an operation, I've been given PPE asset, I've been given house and building. The entity intends to sell them. Yeah. If they intend to sell them in the next 12 months, then what should they do? Should they still be there under a non-current asset, or should we put them elsewhere? What does it mean? Presentation. That takes us back to the other comment in my previous slides, presentation. So you realize that these are actually interlinking. And the moment those components don't integrate, it becomes very difficult for you to be able to pass this particular paper. So you can actually see that what the examiner is pointing out, yeah, are actually interlinked from one standard to another standard, to presentation, to knowledge, to integration, and all those kind of things. So it's not just a matter of, I know IS 16. How do I identify IS 16? How do you recognize IS 16? How do you measure IS 16? How do you disclose IS 16? The question is, how do you apply them? Now that is the benchmark. That is the basis for this paper. So that by the time you leave, yeah, and I'm sure maybe some of the candidates who are doing this paper, actually accountants, a full-time accountant in organizations. I'm sure you do some of these things in practice. Maybe in an examination, look at it in a way that actually I'm preparing the company accounts. I'm sure candidates who are doing this paper participate in preparing end-of-year audits, end-of-year accounts, end-of-year financial statements. How do you present your financial statements? How do you prepare them? How do you do these clarifications? Yeah. I also tend to believe maybe candidates who are undertaking this paper maybe work in audit firms and undertake these things. So it beat my understanding if the examiner still quotes this particular component thing. Maybe it's just maybe candidates are not paying attention to detail. Yeah, maybe they're not reading these questions and understanding them clearly. So it is something as you prepare for your exams, you have to pay keen interest. And it is actually very important for CPA because you're going to be a professional. So if you can't put these things together, yeah, then that's where we'll start have maybe people complaining of a CPA can't just apply basic. So I think these things are building us and we should take them seriously because when you're preparing for this exam, this knowledge is applicable in practice. And I think that's why some of these exams, some questions that are set at this level are actually practical questions. They're scenario-based questions. They actually take the real environment we deal in, the real accounting we do every day. So let's look at point 5. IFRS 2. From the observations the examiner made, it seems like almost all students were able to compute the share-based payment computations because from his or her comment, it says computations under IFRS 2 were well done. Then why is it that candidates didn't get all the marks under this? Let's look at point 6. So before we go there, so there could be a possibility now. This is where we talk about presentation. If I compute a share-based payment vesting period, then after I got this, the amount say to be taken to P&L or to equity, then what else? What do those figures mean? Now that takes us back to the general observation, presentation skills. I compute a figure, I get the vesting period right, I get the vesting condition right, I get the right amounts to be expense in P&L, I get the right amount to be to increase my equity or my reserves. Then what do those figures mean? You're advising management. Do you just compute and leave them there? Yeah, they should be accompanied with an explanation because at this level, yeah, is internalization of knowledge, presentation of this knowledge, be able to analyze this particular what you've computed. So as much as candidates might have computed, I'm just giving you what I think, what I draw out of these comments. If the candidate is able to compute these figures well, then do you just leave them there hanging? Yeah. When to me, when I'm doing an exam, you take the examiner as if like let me use a word that maybe is a primary one kid. Like I'm just trying to explain you from the scratch. I'm trying to make the examiner understand is management, because in management as accountants, we deal with people who are not accountants. So when you're presenting to them, maybe you present to board of directors, what do you tell them? Do you just throw to them, I found figure X, figure B, figure Y? Then what do they mean? You have to explain to them in a nature of a report. So that takes us back to presentation skill. What do these figures mean? Yeah, you compute depreciation. Yeah, then what does that depreciation mean? So you need to explain, because maybe that question asks, discuss to management, advise management, analyze. Yeah. So look the in-depth of those figures. Don't just leave them hanging. Yeah, because you're writing a report. Okay, let's look at part 6, number 6. So part of the question regarding modification of condition on equity instruments was avoided by candidates. So it's simply meaning that actually the component of modification of vesting conditions of equity instruments, maybe candidates didn't know, had nothing. So that takes me back to choice of question under the general observations. When you are attempting a question, why would you pick a question that you can't do all the components of those questions? Remember, you're trying to accumulate 50. So if a question is 25 marks and you find IFRS 2, it only has 5 marks, and you can be able to do that. And then there's the other component of 20. Why do you pick that question where you can't do the other bit that will have bigger components of marks? So I think also that could be contributing to this paper not having a very good performance. So choice of question is also very important and very key. So let's look at question 3. I'm almost done. Question 3 for September 2022 looked at IS 8, IS 41, and IS 16. Now, when I was reading the comments of question 3, I observed something. Let me just share them with you before I look at the specific comments that the examiner said. There was an indication from these comments that as much as a candidate seemed to know the components of, say, IS 8, IS 41, and IS 16, yeah, they did not try to understand what the examiner actually was examining. Like, the candidates will just write a full paragraph to the examiner from the detailed report I went through, explaining IS 16 from recognition criteria, from subsequent measurement, from measurement after recognition, from disclosure requirement, the whole standard, leaving out the actual common components or scenario that the examiner wanted the candidates to explain. So you realize that you explaining the whole standard in totality, yeah, does not do you any favor. So I observed that, and I think it cut across. I must have missed it out. Just remembered it when I saw this standard. I think where the examiner had noted that the candidates were writing for them the details of that particular standard without taking into concern what actually did the examiner want in this particular question. So I think that's when I went back and said the principal understanding of this particular standard is very key. And then after understanding the component of this particular standard, I look at the scenario being given and say, how does standard A, or say IS 8, IS 41, IS 16 apply to this particular scenario? And then you customize those components to the scenario that the examiner has given you in the exam. So having said that, I look at comment 1 of question 3, that candidates couldn't identify IS 8 and how a transaction can be accounted for as per IS 8 if it changes in useful life. So you realize that, and before I even go far, even IS 8 is a standard in paper 8. And actually, it must be also a standard in paper 1, if I am not wrong. So it's just much of a surprise that maybe the examiner has given you a scenario and then wanted you to identify under what standard does that scenario fall. Like, say, if I was depreciating an asset, I'm giving you an example. I don't tell you, maybe the examiner doesn't tell you which standard it is, and tells you, I have a motor vehicle, or I have a building, or I have a plant and equipment or a computer, which we estimated that actually its useful life is 10 years. And then after maybe the end of the first year, or the end of the second year, or the end of the third year, yeah, they realize, okay, this asset can no longer go for 10 years. It can only go for 7. And then they ask you, what is that? So a candidate at this level with the integrated knowledge will be able to quickly know that, okay, the useful life of this asset has changed. So under what standard does it apply? And if you're able to apply that standard, then you bring in that innate knowledge, you know that this is how you account for it. So I think picking that scenario based and then fixing it into a particular standard, I think that's what the examiner noted here, that candidates were not even able to identify what standard that was in that particular scenario that was set. And it was actually IS 8. So it's very important that when you're preparing for this paper, you should be able to identify what standards are applicable at first sight on particular transactions. Yeah, and even in practice, even in our offices, or even in our places of work, that in the field of accounting, we are in finance, we manage, yeah? Those are things we deal with every day. So you should be able to understand, to apply it, be able to identify this particular standard. Component number 2, candidates couldn't determine the present value of PPE item as per IAS 16 when provided with the feature of the asset. Paper 1, I will repeat again, paper 1, paper 8, paper 13, under IAS 16, whenever you're capitalizing the initial cost of the asset, yeah, what normally happens, this is even in financial management, integration of knowledge. The financial management, I think there should be a financial management paper in level 2, yeah. There's something called compounding and discounting, present values and future values. Assuming you entered into a contract with someone to buy an item today, but pay him in the future, yeah, a certain amount, what should you recognize today? This is taken care of under IAS 16. Even if you didn't know IAS 16 very well, at least if I had knowledge, and I know in financial management, I know what a present value is because of changes in inflation, interest rates, yeah, the economy changes itself, yeah. Take an example, COVID-19 is affecting the war in Ukraine, Russia. It's affecting the interest rates, yeah? It's affecting the inflation rates, yeah. So money today is not the same as money tomorrow, yeah. So this is the basic knowledge. This is the what you call the comprehensive knowledge that someone doing this paper should actually be looking at achieving before you prepare for this particular paper. I will comment something as I'm finalizing that will also see where are you studying from, yeah? Where are you studying from, yeah? Where are you studying from? The person who is tutoring you this particular paper, yeah? Does this person understand also this particular component, yeah? I used to lecture before until later 2017, but you will observe people who lecture some papers when they actually don't understand this paper actually very well. So after leaving class, maybe I went and sat in Wire's class or Peter's class, then he went back home, then do I take time to actually look at these things? So it's actually very important. So when I think for me as a professional accountant, when I see some of these components, some of these comments, it takes me back to the previous, how do I integrate knowledge? How do I integrate knowledge to all this paper? If I passed QT, I shouldn't brush it off. There is a certain component of knowledge that I will need in QT to pass maybe paper 13. Maybe there's a certain component of financial management that I will need to make sure I pass paper 13. Just that basic knowledge, yeah? Just that basic knowledge, that principles in this particular paper. So you realize that this particular comment, in my opinion, I would have said that maybe this is one of the basic principles that I didn't expect candidates at paper 13 not to know how to, that if I have a future value, it will be able to recognize this. But you realize maybe you could be able to have the knowledge knowing, but if I apply it, be able to write it down, you cannot be able to do it. So it's something that when you're preparing for these papers, you need to do more practice. You need to be able to apply actually what you see on those books into these papers. So it's good that we should improve our preparation skills, not only to pass the exam, I think for also future knowledge, yeah, to be able to help us do, because these are things we do every day. And I'm sure even my participants who listening to me right now, these are things you actually apply every day. And it's actually very key when you're going for these exams, you should always be prepared very well. Treat these examiners as if you're actually teaching them what this particular standard is. Try to explain to them in details and then show them the computations. And then we have point 3. Candidates could not differentiate between IAS 16 PPE and IAS 41 agriculture while accounting for the eucalyptus plantation in the books of accounts, including at point of harvest. IAS 16 deals with assets. IAS 41 deals with assets, but different types of assets. I-16 is agriculture. No, I-41 is agriculture. I-16 is PPE. You realize that the initial measurement could look a little bit similar. Subsequent measurement could look a little bit similar. Disclosure requirement, but these are completely different standards. However, they have their unique features. Like say the way you apply fair values under I-41 could be slightly different from how you apply fair values under I-16. So differentiation of these standards actually also is important. So to me, this one would be that possibly it could take me back to the general observations that maybe when we're preparing for these papers, there's too much of cram work. And the moment you cram something, you will not be able to apply it in depth. So confusing an asset standard, like say IS38, let me take an example of IS38, intangible assets. When you look at the flow from recognition, initial measurements, you could read it and feel like, oh, the flow is almost similar to the one of IS16, but it has its own unique features. IS38, it's intangible assets. The other one is property, physical assets, property, plant, and equipment. So the in-depth understanding of this particular standard to be able to understand what are the unique features of this particular standard. Actually, I will advise students to avoid sometimes confusing these particular standards. When you're reading them, try to pick out those unique features that are in IS16 that don't appear in IS41. Other than just cramming and say, I know IS16 is PPP, IS41 is I. Okay. And then question 4. So that was question 3. So question 4, corporate governance and rational analysis. Every day we deal with corporate governance. Organization deal with corporate governance. So I was even surprised when I was preparing this presentation to see a comment like candidates couldn't identify elements of corporate governance. Corporate governance is how an organization is managed. Internal audit, finance, board of directors, and all those kind of things. So it's very important that, and it's very key that there are certain components that we ignore or take for granted when we're preparing these financial statements that I think are affecting the preparation of students for examination. Because rational analysis is something that has been done in quantitative techniques, financial management, paper 1, integration. So I feel that when someone who has passed level 1 and level 2, and you examine rationality at level 3, it should be quick meat. Quick meat for the candidates. Like there are certain questions that actually could give you easier and quick points and quick marks accumulation if well attempted. Another observation, candidate indicated corporate governance as being disadvantageous to the organization. I don't know how corporate governance can be of a disadvantage to an organization. I know corporate governance, well management of an organization is always to the benefit and accrue maximum advantage to organizations. But it's interesting that the examiner noted that candidates only identified disadvantages of corporate governance. So it's simply meaning that maybe even candidates didn't know exactly what corporate governance is. That means reading wide. And maybe I'm also imagining that maybe candidates didn't know that corporate governance forms part of paper 13. So that comes back to the previous comments, general comments, syllabus coverage. So while you're preparing for this particular paper, I'll prefer that candidates first take time before you start reading. Look at what am I preparing for? What is the extent of my syllabus? What are the components of this particular syllabus, so that at least you can be able to touch everywhere? Because initially I said covering 95 and above % of the syllabus is better, if not 100%. I would prefer someone covering 100%. But maybe anything below that, below 95%, a candidate could likely face challenges. Then point number 3, under question 4, candidates had the correct formulas for return on capital employed and return on equity, but couldn't put the correct figures together to compute these ratios. So same thing I was saying, since the candidates knew the ratios, they knew the formulas, but now the applicability, you've been given a balance sheet, pick out the figures. Yeah, pick out the figures. Since the candidates couldn't be able to pick out the figures, applicability of these components. Because now if you're able to say return on equity, this is the formula, return on capital employed, this is the formula, current assets ratio, this is the formula, quick asset ratio, this is the formula. Can you be able to pick those figures from the, maybe the balance sheet you've been given and put them into these formulas and get the right figures, ratios, and do proper analysis? Integration of knowledge as well. Question 5, IFRS for SMEs and integrated reporting. I don't know if candidates also in our workplaces, people tend to confuse so much the full IFRS and IFRS for SMEs. So, and this is actually covered in the syllabus. And I think from all the observations I've seen from way back December 2021 to 2022, candidates are still failing to pick out what kind of IFRS apply to SMEs, and maybe not knowing what an SME is, and also dealing with the integrated reporting. So what are the comments? Comment number 1, candidates still used full IFRS to account for transaction under SME that had been given to be accounted as per IFRS for SME. You will realize that actually some IFRS for SMEs have almost similar, not the same, but almost similar, requirements of accounting for transactions under full IFRS. But they differ in their own way. They differ only in terms of measurement. Say, take an example, goodwill, take an example, impairment losses, take an example when you revalue an intangible asset, and there's an increase in the intangible asset. Do you recognize this revaluation gain? The way IFRS IS 38 account for it is different from the way IFRS for SMEs account for this. So it's very important that because IFRS for SMEs are accounted for in terms of sections, are classified in terms of sections. So when you, so long as you know the IFRS, it will be easier for you to pick out the unique features for the IFRS for SMEs. And I don't think candidates will be able to get hard time for it. So inadequate knowledge as regards corporate reporting. This is a comment that has been there year in, year out, year in, year out, year in, year out. So it takes me back that candidates just need to read further. They need to read in depth. Now, what are the common mistakes that candidates make in this paper? What are the common mistakes? Number 1, narrating the whole standard from recognition, measurement to disclosures, requirement without taking into consideration the requirements of a question on specifics. I've already talked about this. I've mentioned this. Examiner asks you a question about a particular standard. Candidates narrate the whole standard applicability. Next one. What other mistake do candidates make? Inability to identify standards for specific transactions. I've given you the example. You've seen one of the comments the examiner made, confusing standards. Like say, I've used the same example the examiner made. You confuse IS 36 for IS 16, IS 40 for IS 16. You can't identify what is IS 37. What are these IFRSs? So the confusion of standard, they ask you about a particular standard, but the examiner answered that question based on another standard. So it's simply meaning that maybe we're not reading enough, we are not well prepared, and we're not having proper knowledge of this particular standard. Another mistake, which I've also talked about, that candidates concentrate on computation and leaving out discussion components of a report. That I've already talked about it. That when you
It's a bit extreme.
Yes.
That particular slide here.
Yes.
I think it's a mistake. IS 40 is 41.
Yes, IH41, yes. Sorry, IH41, yes. Apologies. So you realize the confusion of this particular standard. Thank you for the correction, Mr. Mchivi. So I move to the next one, which I've already talked about, that candidates concentrate on computations. You compute very well, get the correct figures, but the question is, the examiner has asked you, can you present a report to the board of directors? Can you advise the board of directors? We all write reports, I'm sure. I'm sure people at this level have written very many reports. So when you compute a figure and just leave it hanging for the examiner, how does he know what that figure means? Yes, the figure could be correct, but what does it mean? How do you write a report? How do you present a report? A report is supposed to have an introduction, table of content, the body, the annex, the appendixes, all of them are components of the report. Maybe just computing the figures and getting them right are just the components of the appendix. So where is the body of the report explaining these figures that you found here? That had been a comment from December 2021 to now. Inability to write reports and inadequate presentation skill, which I've already talked about. Spotting, I've done for you the other analysis, not for spotting, to be able to understand that actually core principles of this particular subject, they examine business combination. Business combination is, can you be able to do business combination at any angle? Business combination with foreign subsidiaries. Business combination when an entity loses control. When do you do business combination? When do you present consolidated financial statements? At any angle. So simply meaning that I think sometimes candidates just spot and cram a particular answer. When you just tweak something, maybe candidates are off the line. If I look at March and June, March and December, then June and September. Number one, cash flows. The other one, business combination. So you realize there's a little bit of a problem. Then non-coverage of syllabus, which I've talked about, and then question interpretation. Poor time management. Failure to use marks allocation. Something very important that sometimes the way marks are allocated in this paper should be able to help you determine how much time you allocate on that particular piece of number. Take an example, a question that has 5 marks and another one has 20 marks. And you spend 15 minutes on a question that has only maybe 4 marks. By the time you come to this one, which has 20 marks, time is done. So time management is also very important. Then basing answers on the rote knowledge rather than the application of the knowledge scenario, which I've also talked about, applicability. I've come explaining that. Attending classes. I think of late, given when COVID came, I think most candidates are trying to avoid classes. Nowadays, online has come. In my opinion, currently, I don't think there are certain papers like, say, paper 13, MDC, advanced paper 14, public sector. There are papers that, in my opinion, now that COVID is no longer too much of a restriction, attending physical classes is very important. I think going back to classes is very important. There are times when I'm leaving my office and I'm going back home, you're in jam and you see someone on phone, he's attending classes while driving, maybe paper 13. So it's very important that actually this is very important. This is a comment that I also saw on the examiner's comments, and I think it's key. It's key that maybe candidate needs to start attending physical classes, more especially for this computational and analysis discussion papers. It's very, very, very important. Nowadays, people have gone back to their phones, Zoom. I don't think you can attend some of these classes on Zoom and get everything right. Then reference made to examiner's comments, solution and question approach during examiners. I think I've also talked about it. Let's take some time to look at the examiner's comments. Let's look at what the examiners are saying. Let's look at what they intended the students. It's a guide. Don't use this at paper. It's a guide. It's actually a guide. And then also, having said that, I made another point here from the examiner's comments, where they say that choice of study institution and tuition providers is critical to candidates. I think also these 3 points are interrelated. when you start going to class, also where are you studying from? Yeah. To me, I prefer studying from well-established institution with well-established tutors and those who understand this paper well. Sometimes discussion groups are good, but also having guidance from these well-established professionals is very important when you're preparing these exams. And then syllabus coverage, 90%, which I've talked about. More practice question. I've also talked about it. It's very important. Candidates should take time to do practice questions, get a tutor who can review you, yeah, or you can even review yourself, yeah, not to cram work, but to be able to know whether you understand this question. Do as many questions as possible for revision. Do tests. I think, I don't know, when I was doing CPA back those days in MOOCs, my lecturer, Rogers Matama, used to bring for us exams, and we will do, and we'll take, and he will mark, and then you know where you stand. I don't know if that still happens. It's been a long time since I saw how candidates prepare for themselves exam, but I think it's also important, given that now the world is changing so fast, the smartphones are coming. I think we need to go back to this practice question component. And then choice of examination diet. I think also in my observation, given that from the pass rates, the pass rates have been declining so fast. And I'm trying to imagine that maybe candidates there are 4 sittings in a year, and candidates, you sit in June, you sit in March, you sit in December, you sit in September. I don't think those are timelines of 2 months, 3 months. I don't think that's enough time for candidates to prepare for a paper like this, which is actually very wide. Maybe, I don't know what the institute has, but I think having these very many sitting also, I think maybe it's acting as a disadvantage to some of these candidates. Maybe the institute will advise on that one. And then frequently asked questions. I had a chance also to look at last sitting and attend the webinar for the previous sitting, I think July or August, if I'm not wrong. And then I picked out most questions that candidates ask. One, that can a candidate pass if he does not attempt question 1? Honestly, I don't know, but maybe the institute will answer that. But in my opinion, question 1 of this paper has 50 marks. So if you do not attend question 1, you can only have to attend 2 other questions which have 25 and 25. Then you should be able to be 100% accurate to pass. I saw a comment in one of the sittings. I should have been June, where there's an observation that some candidates did not even attend question 1. So by the time you don't attend question 1, it's a compulsory question. The possibilities of passing are almost 0%. Why? Because these other 2 questions, you must get 25 out of 25, meaning 50, which is also possible. When you get a sharp student and you can be able, but in my opinion, not doing question 1 is suicide. And then another question, can one pass when he or she only attempts only 2 questions? Still, my opinion would be, if the examiner asks you to attend 3 questions, attend 3 questions. Why would you have to do 2 questions? You are limiting your chances of passing. And maybe if you attended more, say they told you to attempt 3 and then you attempted 4 or 5, in my opinion, maybe the concentration that you'll have put maximum concentration in this question, you'll have to do faster so that you attempt many questions. So I'll be very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wade, for that insightful presentation and wise counsel you have given us, which are helpful for us to excel. Dear participants, feel free to type in your question in the chat or Q&A. Feel free to ask him anything to clarify. For emphasis, Mr. Wade, you have talked about candidates failing to identify the standard which is required in a particular scenario. How can you help them to easily understand which particular standard is being asked in a particular scenario? Because it's clear that candidates really find it hard to identify which is being asked, and that's the point at which they begin to go astray. And also time management, because examiners indicate marks on each question, meaning they want to guide you which time you should spend on your question. If one has 5 marks, shouldn't you spend 2 pages, 3 pages writing a question, answering a question of 5 marks, and leaving which was the 20 marks, giving it your time. So I think those are the major emphasis points our presenter has put forward. So we now welcome our other views, comments. Feel free to ask anything. Go to Q&A and type in. Also use the chat.
Thank you, Mr. Mchivi. So how can students be able to identify this particular standard? So I'm going to give you 2 guidances. However, the second one is not necessarily the best. The first one is very simple. These particular standards have unique features in themselves, especially those standards that look similar. Take an example of all the asset standards, all the assets that standard deals with assets accounting. IS 38, IS 16, IS 41, what else? IS 40. Now, this particular standard looks similar in themselves, but what separates these particular standards? Their unique features. Like say agriculture, IS 41 for agriculture deals with agricultural assets. That's what makes it unique from IS 16. So if a candidate is able to pick out those unique components on this particular standard, it will be very easy to identify which standard is this one. Take an example of IFRS 2, share-based payment, vesting periods, yeah, employment benefits, yeah. A candidate confusing employment benefits, yeah, with IFRS 2, what are those unique features? The unique features under IFRS 2 is trying to give shares to already existing employees when they fulfill certain vesting conditions. However, IS 19 share-based payments, these are payments to do with salaries, benefits that that employees get out of employment. Yeah. So if a student can be able to pick out those unique features in a scenario-based question, it will be very easy for you to be able to attach a standard in a scenario. However, there's the other component which to me I don't believe in so much, which candidates use or could also use, but it depends on how you use it. They call it memorizing of this particular standard. But the only problem with memorizing of this particular standard, you could memorize a standard, and when I give you the unique feature, you will fail to be able to do what? To identify this particular standard. So when you apply the unique features and memorizing the standard, it will be able to be easy for you to identify this particular standard. However, if you memorize without picking the unique features per standard, you will still not be able to understand this particular standard. However, the unique features of standards identified when you have memorized this particular standard will give you a much stronger base of you to be able to know, to differentiate IS 19 from IFRS 2, IS 16 from IS 38 or from IS 41 or those. So that's what I can advise candidates. For the time management, I think you already talked about it. You can be able to manage your time based on the marks allocated per question. And let candidates not forget the integration of knowledge. I think that one is the biggest. Integration of knowledge, paper 1, paper 8, paper 13.
Thank you, Mr. Wile. I can see some people, there is Enwaku says he's grateful for the presentation and he's observing that we take long to upload. We shall upload them soon. Mr. Enwaku, thank you for the comment. There is a Zinda, thanks for it. How we should effectively maximize the time allocated for this paper.
I've talked about maximizing of the time.
Yes.
Time management. I think to me, max allocation should guide a student on how to manage time. Yeah, time allocation. How many points have you been asked to present? If they asked you for 4 points, another question asked you for 20 points, why should you spend 30 minutes trying to get 4 points and spending 5 minutes getting 20 points? So basically, it's max allocated for standard. Yeah.
Thank you. Again, somebody Enoch again says he's talking of the ever-changing standards and he's asking us to revise study packs that's for the institute. I've taken it. And he's also grateful for the, he says it is helpful, yes. Somebody, anonymous attendee says, kindly, I'm requesting to share with me the recordings of financial reporting which took place on Tuesday. Okay, that's also for us. We shall also handle it. Those are the comments so far in the Q&A. Feel free to put in other comments, dear participants. Seek any guidance on what is not clear to you. I think no comment is coming forth. I think participants have been treated properly well. We are satisfied with the presentation. And they seem to be okay. Let me now take this. Sorry?
No, it's okay. Thank you so much.
I wish to thank our presenter, Mr. Wile, for this presentation once again, and also wish our candidates, those who are going to sit this coming exam, to wish you well, to take particular attention to what has been discussed. I'm sure it will help you to reach where you want to reach and excel in this paper. Take time and read the comments. We shall share this. We shall share the slides with you, and you take time to read and see the comments which have affected the previous candidates and don't wish to affect you so that you can pass well. I now wish to close this webinar by wishing you a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good day.